So, hello and welcome to another edition of Bang for Your Business with me, James Burnett, and Lucas Hamby. Hi, Lucas.
Hello.
Today we've got a great guest, Kate Wills, who's the Global Communications and Partnership Director at Malaria No More. Hi, Kate. How are you?
Hello. I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Can we start with just getting some information about Malaria No More, the mission, why it was set up, and what you aim to do day to day in your job?
So, well, I am very biased, but I think we have one of the most exciting missions in the world. Our goal is to end the world's oldest and deadliest disease, which obviously feels quite apt, speaking about it in these particularly challenging times. So malaria has been around since the time of the dinosaurs. It is believed to have potentially killed half the humans who've ever lived. It's played a part through history. It killed many people in the Roman army. Cleopatra slept under a mosquito net. It nearly caused the Panama Canal to stop being built. So it's had this sort of iconic place in human history. And yet the most exciting thing about it is it's preventable, it's treatable, and we can get rid of it in our lifetimes. So we're an interesting organisation. We focus on making sure that the spotlight stays on malaria. So we want to keep it as high up the global agenda as possible. And the reason we do that is to drive government leadership and commitments on malaria, and also funding from government and leaders across the private sector philanthropy around the world. Bizarrely, you might find, we were set up by Simon Fuller of Spice Girls fame, Ray Chambers, the Special Envoy on Health at the UN, and Peter Chernin, the Hollywood film producer. And I guess that tells you a little bit about the way that we work. So we're very interested in running high impact global campaigns and creating platforms which can bring together basically the winning team who can help end this killer disease. So that sort of tells you a bit about what our purpose is. We do advocacy, policy work, and communications campaigns, and then basically look at how we can bring as many powerful people together as possible to accelerate action towards ending it. What I do is I try and create the campaigns. So in the last few years, I've run a campaign called Malaria Must Die, which I'll blow our trumpet for a moment. But for the global community, we won a Webby last week for.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much. But that campaign, we've been fortunate to have it fronted by David Beckham. And that campaign's been about really trying to catapult the message of global health up to the top of the agenda. And so far, I think it's had sort of 2.3 billion followers to it, which is really exciting. And it's played a really important part in driving success and action.
Yeah.
So, Kate, how did you said a little bit about Malaria No More and what you kind of stand for, but how did you get into it? And, was there a pivotal moment to kind of find yourself in an area such as that?
So I started my career in television and public relations, doing sort of commercial partnerships and working on vodka brands and all sorts of things. And then moved into international development about 15 years ago. I've worked for Comic Relief and UNICEF and some big charities. And then one day I was walking along the road, as you do, and I saw Malaria No More. And I'd actually had the fortune of working with them in the World Cup, around the World Cup in 2010 in Johannesburg. So I knew of them. And I saw this job, and basically when you've worked on lots of issues, I've worked on education, climate change, sort of general poverty alleviation, emergencies, a lot of these issues that, they're so important, but they sometimes seem intractable. They seem never ending. It's like you've got to keep doing them. They are so vitally important, but it it's hard at times when you're really fighting an uphill battle. Now, malaria is, of course, very hard as well. That's why it's been around for so long. But the idea of having an issue which you could end and you could finish it and get it done in our lifetimes, to me seemed so exciting, because not just because that would save, well, it kills nearly 500,000 people a year. So that would save 500,000 lives a year, and mainly children under 5. But also probably almost more because it's a moonshot. It represents what we're capable of as people. And I realized that if I could do anything, if I could start to play a small part in showing people what we were able to achieve and our potential and how we could realize that, then that could have so much impact on the other things. So, I mean, malaria is the biggest cause of children staying out of school. So immediately you get more kids back into school, but you also just prove to people what's possible. I'm going to show off, but I had the fortune of meeting Eliud Kipchoge, the marathon runner, in Kenya a couple of months back. And he just very quietly sort of whispered to me, I think it's his catchphrase actually, but, you know, no human is limited. And he just said, you know, if we set our minds to it and we push ourselves, and we can achieve anything. So I see that in malaria, and that's really exciting to me.
When you say the marathon runner, you mean the guy that just ran a marathon under 2 hours?
Yes. Yeah. Is it 1.59.04?
Yeah, whatever it started with a 1.
Yes, that's true.
That's amazing.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
It is amazing that what a motivational factor that is, to know that, you know, within your lifetime you could overcome this.
And your lifetime.
And mine, yeah. What a driving factor that is.
Well, and I think you want to talk about COVID here today, I know, and we're looking at our messaging around COVID, and actually there's a temptation to add jeopardy in. You know, lots of people may die of malaria during the COVID time. Of course, that will happen, but actually, again, you come back to what isn't the most compelling argument here. If we can beat malaria that's been here since the dawn of time, then, and if we've got that ingenuity across the world, then we know we can also beat COVID. So it just plays that real catalytic role of inspiring people in believing in what's possible when we set our minds to it.
Have there been any game-changing moments with Malaria No More with you?
Yes, I have been very, very lucky to have sort of witnessed some mega change in my 3 and a bit years. So when I joined, what I haven't said so far is that malaria was actually in real jeopardy. So when I joined back in end of 2016, 2017, the malaria fight was really in danger of stalling. And I mean, it seems weird saying this now in the context of our topsy-turvy world, but obviously in 2016-17, you may remember, there was enormous political change, and the geopolitics was really changing a lot. You had new leaders coming in, and with that, a lot of funding for malaria was threatened, and it basically started to plateau. And the world has been there before with malaria. So malaria used to be in every continent of the world, apart from Antarctica, because it's too cold. So it was in America. It was rife in America. And in the 40s and 50s, the world decided it was going to end malaria. There's an amazing Disney film, actually, where the 7 dwarfs go out to fight it. And it succeeded in America. It succeeded in Europe. And then the same thing happened. There was a change politically. And the world sort of thought, well, maybe it's enough. You know, we've got it under control. We'll turn our attention to something else. We won't finish the job. And the problem is, because it's such a clever parasite, if you take your foot off the pedal for 1 minute, it starts to adapt. And so you lose all those gains you've made. And so that's why it's still so rife in Africa. And 2016-17, we saw that was potentially happening again. So we set ourselves the ambition of creating a global moment, which when I sort of was given that task with the team, I sort of thought, what is a global moment? How are we going to do that? No pressure. So to cut a long story short, we decided to make a summit and to invite as many heads of government from the world to it. And we basically tagged on to the Commonwealth, which again, seems in some respects like an antiquated group, but it's actually a really interesting group of nations. It cuts across all continents of the world and covers some really powerful countries, and also 90% of its citizens are affected by malaria. So we tagged onto the Commonwealth Summit, and we ended up creating a malaria summit, which was the 18th of April 2018. The Malaria Must Die campaign launched ahead of that. We managed to get a wonderful array of, I think we had 14 heads of government, Tedros from the Director General of the WHO, Prince Charles, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the great author, a load of sort of celebrities and champions. Anyway, that summit did catapult malaria back to the top of the global news agenda, and more to the point, it raised 4.1 billion, which isn't enough, but it provided that catalyst of money coming in from across government, from private sector, from philanthropy, and again, sort of, and I think this is really apt for today, it made governments feel that they weren't in it alone. You know, organisations like Nando's had their backs, that we were together in this fight, and it was a catalytic moment which sort of kicked the malaria. Oh, and really importantly, sorry, I almost forgot, 53 heads of government across the Commonwealth agreed that they would halve malaria in 5 years on that day. So it's, I am a believer in big visions. You gotta have a dream, and go, and dreaming big, taking risks and going for it. So,
and I think that really shows, doesn't it? You know, when you all come together with a common goal, what you can achieve. And you know, interestingly enough, with everything going on right now, I mean, you mentioned COVID there, and obviously we're going through a very tough period. But other than now, what would you say is the toughest period you went through, and kind of how have you dealt with that?
I mean, I think we're going through a tough period right now, to be honest, like so many people. And every time I say that, I sort of kick myself and think everyone's going through a tough period, but that doesn't really take away from the fact that it's hard. We were due to hold our follow-up summit, you know, keeping that momentum going. Momentum's so important. When you get it, God, you want to hold on to it. We had a summit due to be hosted on the 25th of this month in Rwanda. Another excuse to get the great and good of the world behind this mission. And we had a huge campaign, a Pan-African global campaign in the wings, ready to launch. That's been incredibly hard. We've had to, you know, like lots of events around the world, the summit has been postponed for a year probably. We still don't know. We couldn't run you know, we have very limited resources. We have to be extremely careful about where we direct them and making sure that they are used to the greatest impact possible. And there was a real danger in all the obviously the COVID focus that of course we needed to have, that another health campaign would just sort of disappear into the sands and not really make any impact at all. So at the risk of being predictable, I think, you know, this is probably one of the most difficult moments.
And you've talked a little bit about being disrupted with the summit in Rwanda being postponed. Hopefully, I say hopefully, it doesn't sound great, but as you say, we still don't know. Hopefully a year. But what other measures are you currently putting into place to deal with the effect of the situation right now?
Well, I guess what's the key, the buzzword is pivoting, isn't it? We're all pivoting. We are pivoting. So we took the decision to postpone our campaign 3 weeks before it launched. Right. So we immediately had to, and that was before, in our world, an important day, which is World Malaria Day. So we had to sort of pivot and create a new campaign very, very quickly. I mean, I'm a real firm believer, this is incredibly cheesy, but that you know, crisis brings opportunities, and so a lot of listening. One thing I haven't said about us is that we're a tiny organisation. We're 24 people. Right. Everything we do is about partnership. I mean, actually being small forces you to think to hold partnership as your core DNA. So we look for partnerships and we look at how we can multiply our impact. That's sort of real important values for us. So in the context of COVID, it was about, you know, going out and listening to those extraordinarily important and powerful conversations that were being had in the UK, but then also more broadly across the world, you know, really tapping into our I call them our friends and family. And, you know, they do include Nando's, they include malaria community workers in Nigeria on the front line, they include friends at the WHO. So a lot of listening, and then empathy. I mean, I think you'll probably have covered this in other interviews. I think there's some smart advice out there about, you know, how can you as a brand, whether I guess we're malaria or whether we're McDonald's, how do we add value to this sort of global crisis? What's the part that we play in this? And so we've done quite a lot of work thinking about that. And for us, it came fairly quickly, which is we realized that we had this sort of great army of amazing health heroes who were our front line of malaria, and they're quite young, they're dynamic, they're the people in the laboratories creating the new malaria vaccine, but they're also the community health worker on a dodgy old bike determined to get to the village and distribute a mosquito net or spray a house with protective spray. And we realized that those people were actually the same health heroes that were going to be called on to be the COVID frontline. And so I guess what we're seeing is actually that we don't want to add more jeopardy. People are scared. Now malaria, you know, in the Ebola crisis, many more people died of malaria than Ebola, but of course everyone was scared about Ebola. It was an unknown. It was, you know, it's very similar now. So we don't want people to forget about malaria, but actually I think probably the opportunity is again to drive that story of hope and to actually say, look, you know, if we invest in these age-old health problems, then we can build stronger health systems, which mean that we're way better prepared for these pandemics when they come along. I mean, we're just starting to hear the stories of actually some surprising successes, communities which we were terrified were going to be hit so hard by COVID, who also have malaria as such a problem, and actually they know how to deal with disease. It's not easy. Oh my God, it's not easy. But they're quite well prepared for this crisis. And so I think there's a great opportunity to talk about a sort of win-win investment in terms of those longer term health problems, ending up in stronger health systems for everyone, making sure no one's left behind.
Yeah, I love that approach, you know, that offering value, and it's far softer and more relatable. And yeah, that sounds like a really, really amazing approach. I mean, so during these times then, for you said about your small team, how do you kind of keep each other positive, as well as obviously yourself at home?
Yeah, I am a firm believer of the basics. So as much as possible, you know, as long as we're allowed, getting outside, doing exercise, going for a run or a small jog or a fast walk, eating healthily. I think, you know, there are some core things that you can try and look after that set you up well to deal with these challenging times, and, you know, just help you maybe sleep a bit better at night. But alongside that, we were really fortunate. Because we work globally, so, you know, I've got people I work with all the time in South Africa, Kenya, through to Seattle, through to Japan. We are quite used to remote working, but we did have to dial that up rapidly. We have tried to do lots of human things. I think we have a duty all the time, not just in times of crisis, to be human. You know, let's stop pretending that leaders live in this weird bubble where they speak a different language. We're all people. So making sure we had enough time in the week set aside to genuinely find out how people were, recognizing that people all having a very different experience from, you know, whether you're homeschooling or whether you're alone in a flat, you know, whether you're fortunate enough to have a garden as I am, or actually whether you don't have any outside space, you know, but most importantly, taking time to ask people how they were has been really important. And we were tempted to drop that after about the 10th week, but we've kept it as a start of the week piece. And then we've done, I mean, there's nothing radical here, but, you know, things that lots of organisations are doing, the quizzes. Someone suggested a summer secret Santa. I don't know if that works as an analogy, but that was very sweet. So we managed to sort of deliver little presents to everyone as a bit of sort of cheering everyone up. And then we obviously have to watch our resources very, very carefully. We've are members of Care First, which is a sort of it's a support network which can give advice in all sorts of different areas, from mental health issues through to financial issues, or, you know, domestic violence issues, and any of these challenges that people may be facing. So we've really made sure that our teams are reminded that they've got access to that. The last thing we did, actually, because we were really conscious that people sometimes are not good at coming forward when they've got problems, and we wanted to try and capture the problems before they ballooned, if that's the right word. We have an organisational coach, and we sort of ummed and ahed about the fact that we all knew her, but actually we invested in asking her to have a half-hour conversation with everyone. I think it was about 8 weeks in, really just to get down to sort of how they were, any challenges they were having, and sort of organisationally how we could do better. Because we've been fortunate enough to be having a lot of work, but we didn't want to forget, you know, just quite how difficult and stressful this situation is in so many ways.
I like that. You had me at be human. It's a good line.
I should have stopped there. And
No, it was fantastic. we talked a little bit before we started just about the differences, the NGOs. So I was just going to ask a little bit more about that in terms of you and other perhaps more or other well-known NGOs, and also sort of tagging on the end of that sort of question of sorts is what advice you would give other NGOs. But firstly, can we just talk about sort of some of the differences between NGOs and how they work? That would be really insightful.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, it's a big question. But let me think. Well, obviously, you know, you've got local charities, small sort of charities who actually, in the era of austerity that we've been through, have played such a fundamental role in almost sort of being the scaffolding that's kept society held together. And, you know, those are the hospices and the food banks, which, my goodness, have been in so much demand recently. I don't tend to work in that area, but I consider myself a part of that family as well. And then you obviously go all the way through to the bigger sort of shelter organisations, so national charities, NSPCC, sorry about the dog in the background, and then international charities like, you know, Save the Children and Oxfam, who are working on the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, poverty, climate change, gender equality, water, sanitation, food, all those very, very big issues. And I mean, a lot of people, you know, who follow you guys will obviously know that the charity sector, I mean, you can't have escaped the fact that the charity sector has been under quite a lot of pressure over the last few years, in lots of different ways, through having to, as I say, sort of support areas where the government funding has dried up, through to, you know, problems of reputation, through to, I actually think, a bit of a midlife crisis, if I'm really honest. You know, the charity sectors in the UK is very established. It's a very mature sector. And I think we probably are at a point where we need to take a good look at ourselves, which we're doing, and adapt and change. But we're probably in the midst of that. So to have COVID coming in at that time is quite challenging. You know, change is always challenging. So I don't know if that's too vague for you.
No, not at all. Not at all. Great.
You said it. The kind of charity sector was in a midlife crisis, as it were. You know, would you say that the changes that we're going into have were kind of inevitable to happen, but they've just been sped up because of the pandemic? Or, you know, how do you think that's going to impact the charity sector as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the changes that all types of organisations are going through are affecting the charity sector directly. So obviously the biggest, most obvious one that springs to my mind is digitisation. So a lot of the activity which maybe in the past was done face to face or in charity shops, in town halls, all of that is sort of suddenly needing to become more digital faster. So I mean, I haven't done enormous work in this, but yes, there's opportunities there to learn fast and to adapt fast. But there's also real challenges with funding. You know, funding was already very difficult. You've got organisations like Christian Aid, who I think a couple of weeks ago should have been doing their biggest Christian Aid week, their house-to-house sort of dropping envelopes off through doors. Not only are obviously people, the public, their purse strings even tighter than before, but obviously you can't do that face-to-face fundraising. So organisations are having to rely much more heavily on their direct debits, on that sort of long-term giving that they rely on. And we're very fortunate, we're funded by sort of a group of foundations and sort of bigger donors. We're not reliant on public fundraising, which protects us from some of that. But you will have noticed in the news there have been some sort of significant furloughing across Oxfam, and there's been closure of charity shops. And so I think, you know, charities are having a really hard time. And what's really difficult is they're probably going to be needed more than ever after this. So we have to find ways. I mean, obviously there's been conversations with the government. We have to find ways of protecting their income streams, of finding new ways of fundraising with the public, but also going to other sources. And there's some brilliant creativity out there. UNICEF, I think, have just won an award for their sort of Paddington Bear mail out for sort of young kids, to get young kids interested in international development and to help sort of incentivize regular giving. There are so many other examples. I think the One campaign, which is a campaign run by Geldof and Bono, which is the global campaigning organization, done great stuff with gaming recently. So I think charities are rising to the challenges. And obviously what you're also seeing is extraordinary rallying at the local level. I'm a complete optimist. And I know there's hard times, and I know people are suffering, and I know we need to do more as a community and as a global community. But I see people coming together on their streets. I see more people going to food banks. I see people donating, realizing how fortunate they are. So I think there's something very powerful there. We've had, and we're having this global experience of this shared danger, and we're realizing our vulnerability no matter where we are. And so if we can tap into our empathy, as you know, in our road, in our village, in our town, in our world, then I think we'll be fine. We'll see it through, but it will of course be difficult, as it is for lots of people.
That word you just said there, empathy, I think that's one thing during this pandemic that is a positive. I think we've all, like you said, what your team are doing and what I think a lot of people are doing. It's just touching in with your loved ones and asking them if they're okay. And it's a lot of it's something we probably all weren't doing enough previously. So yeah, I think that's a really important word and something that has improved during this pandemic.
To bring out more human kindness, really, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely. I think, you know, there's something very powerful happening, which is we're having this shared tectonic moment that's going to define pretty much all of our lives. And so for me, what I want to do is try and capture the positivity in that, and remind people of how we can rally together and how we can make the best of it, and then how we can, you know, I'm going to use a government term, but how we can build that genuinely better and stronger, all together.
Yeah. It's a good example, isn't it? How you know, we are one world, we are humanity. And I think sometimes something like malaria, or you mentioned Ebola,
Yep.
it's a problem over there, isn't it? Whereas this is a problem everywhere, and actually a better understanding of that working together can perhaps help deal with problems that we previously just considered, well, they're just over there. Actually, they're not. It's all connected. We're one world.
Yeah,
We need to
absolutely.
be involved.
And I mean, you look throughout history at times of great tragedy and times of great challenge, and I think, I'm not a historian, but I think there's a trend for people to bounce back with new resilience and new creativity and new innovation. And so, I mean, the hope is that our leaders around us take that positive force and drive that forwards, and don't, you know, take the other negative, the challenges. So yeah, lots and lots of challenges, but so many opportunities.
Yeah. Really interesting. I don't know whether you've got anything more, Lucas, but for me that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
It was amazing, and
quite
inspiring actually.
Well, it's very lovely to speak to you guys.
Most definitely. Do you have any links or anything we'd put in the bio, so that everyone knows where to find you guys?
Yeah, if I can send you our website, but also link to the Malaria Must Die campaign, which is, we've got sort of David Beckham speaking using, I should have probably said that, artificial intelligence. Lots of lovely, entertaining bits of content to look at.
Right.
And I mean, what I'd love to do also is we're always looking for new partners. So if people, you know, if they feel they've got something to do and they want to join the fight for global health, including malaria, then, you know, we'd love. I'm a believer in sort of inspiration comes from unusual spaces. So
Well, yeah, that's all from myself, Kate, and James. Thank you so much for watching. If this was of any value, please give it a share, like, and yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.